Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts in the US. And I'm very excited to be here for the third time with historian Toni Mount and obviously author. She writes these amazing books, How to Survive in Different Time Periods. So we've done Tudor, we've done medieval, now we're up to the Anglo-Saxons. And I only know 1066 as a date, so I'm guessing we'll learn a lot more than what I know. But before we get started, I just want to say uh, thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. I could not do this fun stuff without them. I'd also like to thank Toni for letting us share this program with other libraries because, when libraries work together, we just make magic. You can buy signed books by Toni from Aesop's Fable locally in the US and on her website, which I will share with you in a recap email after our talk. We are recording. I will send the video link to everybody afterwards as well. I will be turning the chat off during Toni's slides, and I'll turn it back on when she's done. And if you have questions for her, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I will moderate those again after the slides. We're here for about an hour and 15 minutes, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Toni, I am so thrilled to have you back again. I'm going to let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be talking about, and I'll be back in an hour.
Okay, well, thank you, Mina. Thank you for inviting me back. Yes, I'm Toni Mount. I've been interested in history since forever. And a couple of years ago, I was asked to write this book on how to survive in Anglo-Saxon England. So the idea is that if you were a time traveler, you could go back to Anglo-Saxon England, and my book would help you to, survive. Now, Anglo-Saxon England refers to a period from around 450 AD. That's after the Romans had left Britain in the lurch to face her enemies on her own, right up until the date Mina mentioned, 1066, which is a bit of a landmark in English history, though I'm never sure why. That was the year that William the Conqueror came from Normandy and ruined England, really, and set up a new monarchy. And we actually have the descendants of that monarchy ruling us today. So the period I'm looking at is from 450 to 1066 AD, when a group of people, lots of groups of people really, from Denmark, from Germany, and various other tribes from that area filtered into England and took over, kind of where the Romans had left us. But no stone buildings for this lot, and they were far better sailors. They really knew a lot about shipbuilding, and they were basically interested in farming. Now, have any of you read the Lord of the Rings trilogy or The Hobbit, written by J.R.R. Tolkien? Or you might have been captivated by the movies based upon them, whisking you away to a land where elves, dwarves, hobbits, and men battled wicked wizards and dragons and went in search of enchanted rings and a happy ending. Well, Tolkien was a professor of Anglo-Saxon literature and history. But was life really as dangerous as he makes it sound. So supposing you could travel back in time to those dark days, how would you get on? Oops, it's not working. How would you get on with these Anglo-Saxons? How would you survive among people who believe that elves and dragons exist and could disrupt your life at any moment? How might you keep safe when warriors clash, as pagans become Christians, and then some of them change their minds again and desert Christianity? Now, so much alters during the 6th century when these Germanic and Danish Anglo-Saxons rule England. The people adopt Christianity, giving up their old gods. Society gradually becomes literate, recording stories and law in written documents. Ideas of government and a legal code lay the foundations for justice even in our own time. The Anglo-Saxons gave us the days of the week. Wednesday is Woden's Day, Thursday is Thor's Day, and Friday is Freya's Day. Coinage gradually becomes important for trade rather than just exchanging one item for another. But not everything is an improvement. Gradually, through the period, the fabulous crafted jewellery of the earlier days disappears. And also, sadly, the gap between the rich and the poor gets wider. Now, if you did travel back, where might you live? Well, timber is the main building material, not just for houses, but for churches and royal palaces. And this is why Anglo-Saxon buildings don't last until the present. Often the sites are only identified by archaeologists because the holes in the earth dug for the supporting post appear as blackened circles in the soil. When the wood rots away, turning the infill of soil black, the Anglo-Saxons simply rebuilt. Inside, your house would be sparsely furnished with a basic bed, bench, and a couple of stools. But there would be a central hearth with a cauldron hanging over it, suspended from the rafters, and this would make it cosy. In an early Anglo-Saxon village, there are likely to be 2 larger buildings. One will be the Anglo-Saxon version of the village hall cum pub. This was called the mead hall and was where the community spent its evenings dining and drinking together, telling stories, singing, exchanging news, and having the elder or lord make known either his or the king's orders. The other large building is the weaving house, and the women spend much of the day here, turning wool or flax into textiles, not just to clothe their families and fellow villagers, but to sell elsewhere. But the weaving house isn't just the place where the women work. It's here that they make the domestic decisions while the men are out farming, hunting, or fishing. And although the village elder probably thinks he's in charge, really it's the women who manage the day-to-day running of the community, making most of the important decisions. Sitting at their upright looms, they discuss ways to stretch the corn store for flour until the next harvest. Remedies that might help childhood ailments, and fingers crossed that the men will catch something tasty to go into the stew pot. Other matters they discuss will involve travel, perhaps to sell the cloth at market or barter it for things the villagers can't make themselves, such as knives, farm tools, and axes, to have their ploughshares and cooking pots repaired, or to purchase pins and brooches to hold their clothes together. You discover the Anglo-Saxon wardrobe doesn't require much in the way of sewing. They simply use pins and brooches to keep their tunics and cloaks in place. But while the women are in the weaving house, they may make the most life-changing decisions, often about arranging marriages. Daughters are usually sent away to wed, whereas sons stay at home and their brides come to them. Although the Anglo-Saxons never heard of genetics, they do know the dangers of too much inbreeding in a small community. Meanwhile, in the mead hall, there we are, it's a very nice reconstruction of a mead hall here in Kent, where I live. So in the Anglo-Saxon village, your neighbours are very likely to be your relatives, by marriage at least if you're a woman. And everybody comes together in the mead hall for meals and relaxation when the day's work is done. Interestingly, as I say, everyone comes together to eat, but after a bit of relaxation, the married couples and their families retire to their own homes. But the young men usually sleep on the benches in the mead hall. If you've ever read the Anglo-Saxon poem story, Beowulf, it's all the young men who spend the night in the mead hall. However, the hall also shelters both people and their animals in times of trouble, with its stout doors barred against storms and blizzards and protected from human enemies, with the men armed with anything from pitchforks and pruning hooks to very exotic swords. The hall has side aisles, just like a Christian church. Now that is because the earliest churches were built in the same way as mead halls. And these aisles are wide enough for a pair of oxen yoked side by side to be able to turn around, which gives you an idea of the size of a mead hall. They're like barns. There are stalls for horses and cattle, pens for sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, and other livestock. So when you're in the meat hall to eat, what are you going to eat? Well, you can forget potatoes, Brussels sprouts, oranges, lemons, and bananas. The Anglo-Saxons only have homegrown or wild vegetables and fruit in season, so there's not a lot of choice. But they do have carrots, which will be small and dark reddish purple, and parsnips, which are also small and white, and rather tough wild cabbage, which is just leaves and no heart to the cabbage. Onions, leeks, peas, and beans are the cultivated crops, and the last two are often dried to keep throughout the year. Wild garlic, a herb called sweet cicely, which tastes like aniseed, wild thyme, wild parsley, summer savoury, dill, and watercress are all free if they happen to grow locally, as are dandelions and sorrel leaves. All of these things are edible. Blackberries, sloes, hazelnuts, and crab apples or wild apples are also free, but wild apples are incredibly sour, and a good deal of honey would be necessary to make them edible. There's no sugar. The only good sweetener is honey. Now, the Anglo-Saxons believe that certain plants aren't just good to eat, they're magical. Also, 3 is a magic number, and 9 is even more powerful because it's 3 times 3. Therefore, they have this special 9-herb omelette. It's guaranteed to cure just about every problem. And since we know the Anglo-Saxons ate quite a lot of eggs, so this is the 9-herb omelette. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes if you want to make any notes. Right. Now, this may make the Anglo-Saxons sound like vegetarians, but the chemical analysis of Anglo-Saxon skeletons show that everyone, from princes to slaves, often ate meat. Now, free meat can be caught by netting small wild birds or shooting larger species with a bow and arrow, a catapult, or a slingshot. They would hunt such things as herons and wild geese. Deer, wild boar, and hares are hunted with dogs, all for the table. There's no gratuitous hunting, it's all to serve at dinner. So I hope you've made the notes if you want. Domestic livestock, like rather scrawny sheep, provides cow meat and pig meat and sheep meat. Do not, if you are back in Anglo-Saxon times, call it beef, mutton, or pork. Nobody will know what you're talking about because these are French words, bœuf, mouton, and pork. used by the Norman lords after 1066 to name the meat on their plates. But since their Anglo-Saxon serfs tend the animals, the live beasts are still called cows, sheep, and pigs. And every animal has other uses apart from supplying meat. But the livestock is smaller than modern breeds and often scrawnier. Sheep give milk and wool, and the animals are kept until they're old, being shorn year after year. So when they eventually die of old age, the meat is tough and has to be boiled to make it tender. Each spring, a lamb can be an Easter Sunday celebration dinner, but otherwise killing a lamb to eat is a terrible waste because you could have the valuable wool off its back for many summers. Cows and goats not only give milk, but horn, which is made into drinking cups, spoons, book covers, lantern and window glass substitute, and toggles for clothing. Their hides, and those of pigs too, can be turned into leather or even parchment or vellum for writing. Animal bone is very useful for anything from tool and knife handles to jewellery, pins and sewing needles, or even glue. You can make glue by boiling up bones. And sinews are turned into bowstrings or used as strong thread, excuse me, for sewing ships' sails together. Nothing is wasted. Animal fat is rendered down for cooking purposes and also to make tallow candles. These are a lot cheaper than beeswax candles, which are reserved for church use or in noble households. But tallow burns with a smoky yellow light and smells horrible. So you can see why the rich prefer beeswax. Chickens provide eggs as well as meat for the pot, as do geese. But the laying season is much shorter than with modern breeds, mainly just spring and summer. Oddly, ducks do not seem to be popular with the Anglo-Saxons at all, and nobody knows why. But because birds have hollow bones, those of chickens and other fowl are also used for making musical pipes and whistles. From archaeological digs, especially in latrine pits and middens, that is sort of toilet pits and rubbish dumps, we know what kinds of fish were eaten by the Anglo-Saxons because we find their bones. But an Anglo-Saxon teacher named Aelfric wrote a dialogue to help his students with their reading, in which a master asks a fisherman about his work and the fish he catches. He tells us that fishing in the river using nets or baited hooks on lines, he can catch pike, salmon, trout, lampreys, and even little minnows. Eels are caught in funnel-shaped baskets of woven willow. Sea fish are caught in nets or with hooked lines, and these include herrings, flatfish, cod, and whiting. Inshore, shellfish are collected, and these are pretty big on the Anglo-Saxon menu. So I hope when you travel back, you like oysters, cockles, mussels, whelks, crabs, crayfish, and lobsters. And incidentally, oysters and lobsters are not reserved for the rich. Poor people eat them too. Oh, dear. I need to click on the next. There we go.
Sorry.
Yep, sorry about that. Now, what is there to drink? Well, in the Anglo-Saxon village you visit, you might be lucky enough to have pear, cherry, and plum trees. And all of these can be used to make alcoholic drink. But the pears will be rock hard, but like crab apples, which can be used to make cider. Pears are used to make perry by fermenting them and sweetening the drink with honey. Or honey itself can make alcoholic mead, which often has herbal flavouring added. Meadowsweet is a very popular flavour called mead wort by the Anglo-Saxons, and perhaps not only for its sweet taste, but because the plant contains a form of aspirin. So you're curing your hangover even before it starts if you drink too much mead. Ale is brewed from barley, but it may have been flavoured with bitter hops. So technically, that would make it beer. Now, evidence for hops comes from an archaeological find made in the Thames estuary off the town of Graney in Kent. A 10th century inshore trading vessel like this one reconstructed here was discovered sunken in the mud, and its main cargo was wild hops. Since hops have no other use but to flavour and preserve beer, we can assume that the Anglo-Saxons drink beer, though later on in the medieval period, hops fall well out of favour as folk prefer their ale to taste a bit sweeter. Wine is imported as a drink for the wealthy, but homemade flour, fruit, and herb wines, juices, cordials, and tisanes can be made in season. So hopefully you will find something to your taste. So that's a brief look at everyday life. But now I'm going to have a look at women's rights. Now, in an ancient book shown in the picture, known as the Textus Referensis, is kept at Rochester Cathedral in Kent. And in it is a 10th century charter all about arranging a marriage. Textus Referensis simply means the Rochester book. Now, firstly, this charter shows that the groom has to promise that if the woman agrees to marry him, and she does have a choice, he will treat her well and pay the bride price demanded by her family. No dowries. It's actually the husband who has to pay the wife's family. So rather different from many cultures today. Now, if the bride isn't keen to marry, and I've discovered from this book that it was well worth playing hard to get, then the would-be husband may have to bribe her to accept him. And in this particular case, Godwine wished to wed Britrick's daughter, and he gave her a pound weight of solid gold, his estate at a place called Street, and everything that went with it. 150 acres of land at a place called Burmarsh, 30 oxen, 20 cows, 10 horses, and even 10 slaves, if only the marriage should be agreeable to her. So that's quite a bribe. Secondly, Godwin must say that what he will give the bride as her morning gift or morgen gifu, that is land or property which will be hers to do with as she wishes. This gift is given on the morning after the wedding, once the marriage has been satisfactorily consummated in bed, because a wedding is all about producing heirs. So it's vital that the couple are compatible. The groom also has to state which of his properties and estates will be hers if she outlives him. Usually she gets half his estate, but if they have a child together, then she gets all of it, with the idea that the child will eventually inherit everything. The groom's kinsmen are to guarantee that this happens, unless the widow remarries, in which case everything is up for negotiation. But once all this is agreed, the couple are officially betrothed. But if the groom is from another village and wants to take his new wife to live there, his family must promise that they will all keep her safe. And if her lord demands compensation for her leaving his village, then the groom's relatives have to pay her lord a fee. Finally, once all that has happened, comes the wedding. And once we are into Christian period, a priest must join the couple to bestow God's blessings upon them. And after that, if a woman should want a divorce, she can simply walk out of the marriage with all her property, and even more if she takes the children with her. Their divorce has never been so simple. So now we're going to have a look at English law, which of course is also the foundation for much of the United States law as well. Now, up until the time when the Anglo-Saxons became Christian, English, as they called their language, is almost entirely a spoken language. Every bit of information is remembered, and the Anglo-Saxons had phenomenal memories. In fact, they think that writing is the lazy way of remembering things. When monks first introduced written records, the Anglo-Saxons still trust what is remembered rather than what is written down. Now, if you look at old legal documents, but some that are written just a couple of 100 years ago, you may come across the phrase time immemorial. Now, this doesn't just mean ages ago, but refers to a time which the oldest living person in the village can remember his or her grandparents mentioning. For example, perhaps someone's land boundary once included an ancient oak tree, which is long gone, but one of the villagers remembers her grandfather talking about climbing the tree when he was a boy, when it used to grow beside where the church now stands. Well, to the Anglo-Saxons, this passed down memory has legal standing and is more trustworthy than what someone has written down and possibly changed to suit themselves. The position of that tree, though no longer there, is still accepted as a legal boundary marker. Now, what do these laws actually entail? Well, for you on a visit to Anglo-Saxon England, you would be a foreigner. It simply means that the local people don't know you. And the law will require you to announce your arrival to the villagers. Shouting or blowing a horn are considered the correct methods, and you must do this as soon as you leave the main road, according to the law code of King Wihtred in 695. If you don't do this, then any crimes committed in the area will be reckoned as your doing. So you have to make a lot of noise or you might be wrongly accused. Hedge breaking is the commonest crime. Today we would call it breaking and entering if it happens in daylight, or burglary if it happens after dark. But it refers to someone entering a property without using the proper entrance. So by breaking through a hedge, climbing over a fence, or in through a window. Now, before the Anglo-Saxons settled down quietly to farm the land, they were a quarrelsome, bloodthirsty people, and tit-for-tat blood feuds went on for generations. So they invented something called were-gild to stop this. Were means man and gild means gold. So it's man gold or man price. And every man, woman, child, and slave has a monetary value. Even a fingernail has a price. If a man injures you, he must pay you compensation. If he steals from you, he must pay the value of what he took, plus a generous bonus for causing you inconvenience. But if the criminal flees and can't be found, then his kinsmen have to pay. And if neither the criminal nor his relatives can afford to pay you in goods or money, then either he or a kinsman must become your slave until they've done enough work to pay off the debt, which all sounds quite civilized to me. Now, sadly, as Christianity becomes more powerful in England, capital punishment gradually replaces weregild, which is unfortunate because a hanged man does his victim no good, whereas compensation could be very helpful. But be warned, if you are caught red-handed, that is literally having blood still on your hands, then the consequences can be extremely serious for you and very expensive. Right, now you probably all speak decent English, and the language is quite unique in the way it evolves. Early on, Anglo-Saxon English has male, female, and neuter genders for words. And it's an inflected language, so words change according to their use, whether a noun, say, is the subject or the object of a sentence, for example. But in modern English, a table is a table, whatever position it has in a sentence, and it has no gender, so that's irrelevant to any adjective used to describe it. And if you've studied other European languages based on Latin, such as French, Spanish, or Italian, you'll know how complicated they can be. Likewise, the Germanic languages, of which Anglo-Saxon is one, are equally tricky. Now, I know modern English suffers from quirky, awkward spelling and a few awkward verbs like the verb to be, which is a nasty one. But genders and declensions of nouns are gone. Now, how did this happen? Well, a lot of unpleasantness is often blamed on the Vikings, but it's because of them that English dropped many of its complications. There comes a time when most of the eastern side of England is known as the Dane law, and it's occupied by the Danes, that's Vikings who settled down, with their own language, laws, and customs. So they're no longer marauding Vikings, but mostly peaceful, settling down to farm the land and trade with their neighbours. But it's difficult to do business with people you can't understand. So a new language begins to evolve, incorporating both English and Danish words. The grammar of the two doesn't have a lot in common, and genders clash so frequently. After all, is a cartwheel masculine, feminine, or neuter? And does it really matter when you need yours fixed urgently? So they forget all about gender. The language we call English today is actually a hybrid with thousands of Danish words, along with Latin from the church, Norman French from William the Conqueror's gang, Hindi from the time when Britain was big in India, and a whole assortment of vocabulary from all over the world. Now, in this picture that I put up, all the words underlined here are Danish. So whether you're angry with your husband or give him a hug, whether there's a gale blowing or fog outside, if you give a guest you don't trust a kick on the leg or toss him out the window, you can't do any of those things without using old Danish words adopted into English. But sometimes both the English and Danish words still remain in use, but take on slightly different meanings. For example, the Old English word shirt is a short, loose garment worn by men and women, or as we would say, a shirt. But Old Danish has the word skirt to describe exactly the same item of clothing, and which we now use for the longer, lower half of the garment. So originally, shirt and skirt were the same thing. So that should help you to speak Old English. Now, my last bit of survival strategy is about what would happen if you fall sick. Now, for the Anglo-Saxons, bringing in a doctor is the very last resort. Once they become Christian, the first resort is prayer and appealing to God. Only if God fails to heal the patient would a leech, that is an Anglo-Saxon physician, be called in to administer herbs, rituals, and charms. The Anglo-Saxons believe illness is caused by witches' spells, or sometimes by the invasion of the body by demons and evil spirits. And of course, if you substitute bacteria for demons, then they're not so wide of the mark. But some diseases are thought to be caused by worms, such as toothache or a headache, being due to a worm annoying the victim. Elves in particular can be very troublesome, hiding in dark places and shooting their minute poisoned arrows at their victims. If you've ever had contains prescription. Right, the recording stopped briefly there, so I'll just repeat. The Anglo-Saxon Physician's Handbook, the Leech Book of Bald, contains prescriptions for a whole range of ailments and conditions. Its owner was a monk named Bald, who attended King Alfred the Great, who ruled from 871 to 899. And poor old Alfred suffered from a number of ailments, including piles, which must have been awful when you had to ride on horses all day, and a mysterious debilitating pain that first afflicted him on his wedding night and plagued him for the rest of his life, though it didn't stop him fathering children. Now, some of the remedies in the Leech Book have genuine healing powers and can still be used today, such as horehound for coughs, feverfew for migraines, and dill for stomach complaints. But one of them, which we wouldn't use today, but we might, is simply to burn for a burn, pound up woad, which is a plant, boil it in butter, cool it, and smear it on. Now, woad has antiseptic properties, and it also colours things blue. So you end up with blue butter. And this would give it an ointment consistency. It would also keep the air from the wound and reflect ultraviolet light, which we now know makes blistering and scarring much worse. So it's actually a sensible remedy. But there are some superstitious remedies, such as the one which says a woman may conceive a child if she binds 12 grains of coriander seed to her left thigh. And the treatment for watery elf disease, chickenpox, is to use a collection of English herbs mixed with holy water, then sing a charm to drive out the evil spirits. And the song, the words are, may the earth destroy thee with all her might. So you've got a mixture of medical and folklore, Christianity and pagan religion altogether. But to end on a positive note, this particular page in the Leech Book of Bald has a remedy that was supposed to treat a sty on the eye. And in 2015, scientists at Nottingham University in England recreated the remedy from Bald's book using onion, garlic, cow's bile, and wine, all mixed in a brass bowl and left to stand for the magical 9 days. And do you know that scientists were astonished when this concoction wiped out bacteria cultures, including the hospital superbug MRSA. So there is the chance that if you fall ill, you may well be able to recover using remedies from Bald's book. So whether you're planning on travelling back 1,000 years or more, or prefer to enjoy the adventure from the safety of your sofa, if you want to know about clothing, warfare, Vikings, and many other topics, how to survive in Anglo-Saxon England is your handy guide that could save your life or simply help you get the best out of your time travelling adventure. The book is available from Pen and Sword Publications on Amazon as both hardback and Kindle download, or by ordering from any good bookshop.
Wow.
And there are the 3 topics so that you can journey back to medieval or Tudor England as well. So that completes my talk. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Of course, Toni. Um, okay. So this is actually our third session with you, and so all three of those, the other two are on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check those out, everybody. I'll send links to those as well. Okay, so a couple questions to start. Remember, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, and I will ask Toni. Oh, I forgot. We are not, you can't raise your hand. And so just type your question into the chat. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my computer actually too. So 1 second. Toni, have you ever eaten a 9-herb omelet and how was it?
No.
No?
Yeah, I have eaten omelettes with various herbs in them, but it was cooked at a place I visited, but unfortunately it was only one omelette and there wasn't any left. But other people seemed to enjoy it. So
That's so funny.
yeah.
Okay. I'm just having all kinds of like pop-ups on my screen. I don't know why. Anyways, the second question is, how pervasive was slavery in Anglo-Saxon England?
Well, slaves were simply the lowest level of society. They could be, as I described, criminals sort of doing their community service. They were quite often prisoners of war. And unfortunately, during this whole era, there were pirates who would kidnap people and sell them as slaves. But slaves were members of your family, so they would still be given meat and bread and drink and treated well because you wanted your slaves healthy to get a good day's work out of them. It wasn't as awful as it was later on. In fact, if you know of St. Patrick, he was actually born in Wales and kidnapped by pirates and taken to Ireland. But of course, he lived long enough to become a missionary and convert the Irish to Christianity. So he went back on his own volition, so it can't have been that bad.
It's a different, history than obviously the US with slavery. So that's a really interesting perspective. Is usually like you said, the prisoners of war as opposed to people being brought over. Annie asks, of your trilogy, which era would you most like to travel to? I think I know the answer to this, but let's see.
That's difficult. I don't fancy Tudor England. I think that was the worst. I think maybe the middle of the Anglo-Saxon period or the late medieval period, the 15th century seems to have been quite civilized. And I think maybe the 9th century, when the Vikings quietened down a bit in Anglo-Saxon England, might be quite pleasant.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you described even like divorce, women definitely had some say in their lives, it seemed like, where later it didn't seem so much.
No, women were considered men's equals, really. I'm afraid it's William the Conqueror who brings the attitude that women couldn't inherit anything, whereas Anglo-Saxons, the daughters and the sons would all inherit. It's a special kind of inheritance called gavelkind. And here in Kent, where I live, gavelkind remained until the 1920s. And all your children inherited, which made things tricky because if you divided up the farm between 6 kids, who then went on to have 6 kids each, you'd end up with a very small farm that you couldn't do anything with. But they found ways around that one or other of the offspring would buy out the others and that sort of thing. But daughters inherited equal. So, yeah, it's not just the boys.
And Laurie asks, when did the bribe change to a dowry?
That is, again, I think that's Norman, the Norman way of doing things, because the Normans had what they still called Roman law. And we'd had Roman law while the Romans were here, in which women were chattels. You were bought and sold, really. You had very few rights. You just sat there, looked pretty, and had children. That was your purpose. That was the Roman way. And the Normans who came from France still had Roman law, which incidentally said that you were guilty until proven innocent, whereas the Anglo-Saxon law had you innocent until proven guilty. So it's with the Normans that we go back to having dowries, where the father literally has to bribe the husband to take his daughter away.
Okay, I have a couple more questions here. Do you know if any early Christian missionaries were martyred by the pagan Anglo-Saxons?
That's a good one. There were, well, yes, some of them were, but it tends to be England in the early Anglo-Saxon period was divided up into what they called the 7 kingdoms. And some of those kingdoms became Christian, and some of them took a while to catch on. And there was often warfare between them, so that Christians from, say, Kent, which was the first to become Christian, could easily be martyred. But they don't seem to have had a culture of murdering Christians like the Romans did. For example, King Ethelbert of Kent was the first king in the 7 kingdoms to be Christianized by Saint Augustine. And he converted the King of Essex just across the Thames and made him a Christian. And one of Augustine's missionaries became Bishop of London, which was then part of Essex. But Sigebert, the King of Essex, his sons remained pagan. So when Sigebert died, Essex went back to paganism. But they didn't kill the Bishop of London. They gave him the opportunity to leave. And
Interesting.
so, yeah, I can't actually think of any Christian martyrs until the Vikings turn up
Hmm.
and start holding bishops for ransom and killing them if the ransom's not paid.
Those
So,
Vikings. Okay, so last question is what's up next for you? Anglo-Saxon England came out in 2024. So what are
yes,
you working on now?
well, already with the publisher and due out later this year is How to Survive in Ration Book Britain. A ration book is the period of World War II and a decade afterwards, when
Okay.
we remained with food rationing, clothes rationing, and everything. So that should be out in November.
Mhm. Oh, wow. I will be in touch, Tony, because in the chat, people are saying how much they enjoy these talks, and I do too. So I will definitely, I mean, that's like, wow, like that's a very big jump time-wise, but
Yeah,
I can imagine it's really wonderful, just as your other
yes.
books are.
Well, it's in some ways more personal
Mm.
because my parents were involved in World War II and I collected their stories. And various of my friends had stories of their parents, and
Hmm.
one or two even remember the period themselves.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
yes, it's a more personal thing. That sounds like a huge jump of over 500 years from Tudor England. Um,
Well,
it,
apparently we'll read anything you write, Tony, so I appreciate
okay.
it. Well,
Uh,
thank you so much for doing this again. Like I said, our
uh,
third one.
it's a pleasure. And thank you for inviting me, Nina, and thank you, everybody else, as well.
Yes, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will be in touch soon with the just various information. So, Tony, thank you again. Have a great day, and good luck with all the construction.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.